Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. Later on the show, we're going to talk to the head of the Capital Good Fund, the lending group that they know of an interesting new way they're trying to raise money to expand the options they're offering to borrowers in Rhode Island. We're going to talk a bit about that. But first, we're going to continue our conversations that have been going on recently about the energy market in southern New England and in Rhode Island. And we're talking with John Niland. He is the Director of Business Development at Invenergy. And we're going to talk about what they do there and the big project they proposed in Rhode Island. John, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Ted. Thank you.
So let's start off. Invenergy. People might never have heard of it. It's invent plus energy, right? Invenergy.
That's correct.
How big is the company, and what do you do across your various divisions?
Well, the company was formed in 2001. It's an independent power producer. We currently have developed and have under operation close to about 10,000 megawatts of generation throughout the U.S., Canada, and parts of Europe. Our primary focus actually is renewable energy. You know, most of the 10,000 megawatts, about 6,000 megawatts is wind powered. We also have about 110 megawatts of solar, and then about 4,000 megawatts of gas fired, either peaking or combined cycle.
So we're going to talk about your project around, but I'm actually interested in that too. Wind and solar, we've been reading more and more the idea that wind and solar prices are really coming down fast, especially on the solar side. Is that what you're seeing in Invenergy?
Yeah, we're seeing that, and obviously, depending upon where you are in the U.S., some regions are much better for both wind and solar than maybe what you see here in New England. So, but yes, we're very keen on renewable energy, and that's really the company's primary focus.
So we're talking today, though, about a more typical, maybe I would say, traditional power plant you've proposed up in Burrillville. You're calling it the Clean River Energy Center. I think we actually have some renderings of what it's going to look like if they get permission and they decide to build it. So walk us through the nuts and bolts of this proposal. What kind of fuel are you going to use? How big is it? And how much will it cost?
Well, it's a natural gas-fired combined cycle unit that consists of two trains with a combustion turbine, a steam turbine, and a generator in between. Each train produces roughly 500 megawatts. We'll also have oil as a backup fuel, in the event that natural gas isn't available. That's really a reliability requirement that the New England ISO sort of imposes on us.
How big, if you think of the size of the facility, once it's built, is it going to look like a high school size? Is it going to look like Gillette Stadium? Is it going to look
Oh God,
small?
no, it's not that big.
Yeah.
The land area that the project itself occupies is probably somewhere in the area of around 18 to 20 acres. Of course, you need a lot more acreage, around that in order to construct the facility. But it's going to be set in a wooded location. It'll be, have sufficient buffer around it so that you'll probably be, when it's all said and done, you'll be driving by and you may not even know that it's there.
Now, it's off Route 100, right?
That's correct.
So you chose this site in Burrillville. We actually recently spoke with an executive at Spectra Energy, which owns the pipeline out there, wants to expand it. I assume that played into your decision making, but tell us about that. Why is this the site that was right for you for this proposal?
Well, there was a number of reasons that went into the site selection. One was finding a location where you had access to both natural gas and to the high voltage transmission system, which the site that we have has access to both. That Spectra Energy, they own the compressor station there. They own all the land around it. They have about 730 acres, so we have access to both gas and electric, within their property confines. And then the reason we ended up in Burrillville is that in New England, they conduct an annual auction that allows new capacity to get into the market. And for the past several years, Rhode Island, the southeastern Mass Rhode Island zone had insufficient capacity, and so they sort of, we call it clearing at the cap. And so that was really what drove us there.
So I have to ask you about the name, Clean River Energy Center. It rankles the environmental folks because they say it's not clean if it's using natural gas. I mean, why did you decide to use the word clean?
Well, the Clear River Energy Center.
Oh, no wonder my problem is
that. Yeah.
I read it wrong.
Well, it's really owing to the nature of where we're going to be getting the water from.
Okay.
In Burrillville, there was a well system that was that's managed by the Pasco Utility District that was contaminated a number of years years ago, and it was shut down by court order.
2001, yeah.
Right. There was a gasoline tank that had leaked, and they had tried to remediate it, but the cost for that remediation was really prohibitive for them and their ratepayers. And when we conceived of the project, I went to Pasco Utility and said, the power project could actually pay for the remediation that could go on there, and we could use the water, because the court order prevented that water from ever being used for potable purposes. We're not going to use it for potable purposes. We want to use it in our steam cycle. So it just seemed to be a beneficial use to have us be able to use the water and pay for the cleanup. And so that's what we're proposing, and that helps, in our view, keep the Clear River, clean. So
I got you.
Clear River Energy Center.
Yeah, all right. So clean, not totally out of the mix, but I messed up my reading there. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
You mentioned including oil in the project too. That's gotten less attention than the natural gas aspect. How much do you think how often would it turn into an oil-powered plant?
We don't think it'll be all that often, quite frankly. It's we filed an air permit application, and we requested to have the ability to fire it 60 days a year. But our expectation is it'd probably be more like, somewhere in the order of, 5 or 10 days, something like that, just based on, historical precedent as to, when those shortage events on natural gas had occurred, in recent past.
So that's what would kick it off if whoever's running the plant said not enough natural gas is coming in through the pipeline, we got to switch.
Right. I mean, oil is, significantly more expensive than natural gas. So, the only time we would do it is when there wasn't enough natural gas available.
Yeah, and the price thing, we've seen, there was a huge drop a number of years ago, and it stayed pretty low, as I understand it, on natural gas prices, especially compared with oil. What's the outlook on that as you guys look ahead? Obviously, you're planning far in the future here. Do you think natural gas is going to stay a good bit lower like we've seen, or do you think it's going to go back up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with the advent of shale gas, the price of natural gas has dropped significantly. In fact, the lowest price point for natural gas in the world is in Pennsylvania. And if you look at the highest price point of natural gas in the country, it's in New England. And the main difference, for that discrepancy is due to pipeline capacity being able to bring natural gas into New England. So Spectra has been looking at, and others have been looking at, trying to increase the capacity coming into the region so it can help lower the natural gas prices. But once they do that, the projections, the U.S. Geological Survey projects that the amount of natural gas that is available, both in traditional and in shale gas resources, is enough to cover our needs at our current consumption rate anywhere from 150 to 200 years.
Now, how much, so we know there's the cheap natural gas in Pennsylvania, but we can't get it up to New England as much as we want because of the pipeline. On the other hand, to expand the pipelines and get it up here, that will cost some money and investment. So are we going to lose a lot of the savings we would have had because we're going to have to invest that money to get it here?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think you'll probably get to a price point that's not going to be, exactly equal to what you see in Pennsylvania, but it'll certainly be lower than what you've seen, in recent past. I mean, there are periods of time last winter when natural gas was $13 a million BTU, and it was $1.50 in Pennsylvania. So
it was that big.
Oh yeah, you have quite a disparity.
Wow. All right, we're going to take a break. We come back, we're going to talk more with John Niland from Invenergy about their big power plant project out in Burrillville. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and we're going to talk later on in the show with the head of the Capital Good Fund about a new effort they're doing to expand the borrowing options they give to folks here in Rhode Island. But right now, we're talking with John Niland. He's the Director of Business Development at Invenergy, and they're the folks who proposed the big new electricity plant up in, or big new natural gas-fired plant up in Burrillville. John, so I looked, it's the application to the Rhode Island Energy Facility Siting Board, which is a panel. I don't know how many of our viewers have paid attention to them before, but they matter for you a lot here. 500 pages almost you had to give them. And a lot of what you walk through is timeline and what you're going to do and what the process is to get this up and running if you win their approval. But can you walk us through, how long is this process with the board going to take? Then if you get approval, when will you construct? When would you actually have power coming out of here? Sure.
There's a number of permits that the project has to get, not only from the Energy Facility Siting Board, but from the Department of Environmental Management for air and water. The Energy Facility Siting Board is sort of an all-encompassing board, and they have override authority, with the local town. And so, the application that we made there, tried to be, as all-encompassing as possible. The timeline that they typically operate under is about a year. We filed the application in late October. We'll have our initial preliminary hearing in January. That will set out the schedule for subsequent hearings, some of which will be held in town. And we anticipate that we would, go through those hearings and be able to get all the necessary permits probably by the end of the third quarter of 2016 or perhaps the beginning of the fourth quarter. And once we have the permits, we should be able to construct. But I think I also have to add that, there's a whole nother step here that we have to go through, and that is through the New England ISO bidding into the forward capacity
and
auction.
the ISO, to remind people, that's it's the independent group that kind of watches over and makes sure there's enough electricity all over, right?
That's right. They manage the regional network. They
different
actually,
from National Grid.
Different. National Grid owns the wires. They make sure the wires are there. The independent system operator, or the ISO, they manage the dispatch and really try to select which units should run so that they can have the lowest cost for power produced. They also forecast what is needed in terms of new generation based on what the loads are, how they're increasing, and potential retirements that have been announced.
So how much will it cost? How much do you think this project will cost, and who's going to pay for it?
Well, we're a private company, right? So our current estimate is that it'll probably be north of $700 million. And it'll all be raised through private funds. But in order to finance that project, we have to go through the forward capacity auction process, submit a bid and be accepted into that auction. And once we can do that, the construct of the capacity payments that the ISO sets up would allow us to finance the project, and then once we get the permits, we can start construction.
Now, one of the environmental groups, the Conservation Law Foundation, they've argued there's no longer an electricity capacity shortage for our market in Rhode Island because it's being redefined into a new zone in February, which will have a different amount, and then a lot of new projects being added, which they say means your project is not needed the way a lot of people thought with capacity issues. How do you respond to that?
Well, the New England ISO filed with FERC in early November the construct for the forthcoming capacity auction, and in the data that they included to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was an estimate of what the needs are. There's probably a number of different ways to interpret the results, but basically our view is that they projected a need of somewhere around 1,500 megawatts for New England in terms of new generation. Ultimately, if we bid into the auction and we're accepted into the auction, I think that's a definitive, we do need the new generation.
So they'll decide.
They will decide,
yeah.
Exactly.
The other concern being raised, of course, is about climate change and the renewable energy versus fossil fuels. Natural gas, sometimes talked about as an interim fuel from one to the other. But will this, if this is up for a long time, will it make it harder for Rhode Island to meet its targets to reduce emissions? Well,
I think probably the better way to look at it is, you have a current existing infrastructure for power generation. And, in some of the releases that you've seen from us, we have demonstrated that with this unit being brought online, there will be a net reduction in emissions that you have right now. And that reduction comes from displacement of older, less efficient, more polluting generators that are currently operating. Said another way, the ISO has identified perhaps up to 6,000 megawatts of existing generators that are probably on the verge or very close to their retirement age, and you need to be able to replace those. And so replacing them with a highly efficient, much more flexible resource like the one that we're proposing is really going to help not only modernize the electric infrastructure, but the capabilities that this project has actually helps promote additional renewables, because what happens with renewables, wind and solar, their output varies as a function of the wind or the sun, if a cloud goes over. And so that creates a challenge for the ISO, because they really need to match the load exactly with the generation. So if you have something, doing this, you need to have something that has the flexibility, the ramp rate, the start times that can help fill in those gaps.
All right, John, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining me, but don't go away, viewers, because coming up next, we're going to have the head of the Capital Good Fund to talk about a new project they're embarking on for borrowers in Rhode Island. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and we are talking with someone we've seen before on this show. We're glad to have him back, Andy Posner. He is the founder and chief of the Capital Good Fund, which is a really interesting group. They're trying to change what people have access to for borrowing in terms of lenders and all that. But you can explain it much better than I do. So give people a basic thumbnail sketch. What is the Capital Good Fund, Andy?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be back on the show. So Capital Good Fund's a nonprofit financial services company, which a lot of people haven't heard of necessarily. So I started the organization 7 years ago, and we provide financial services to low-income Rhode Islanders across two product lines. So one-on-one financial and health coaching, and then small personal loans. So we do things like loans for security deposit on an apartment, vehicle purchase or repair, could be catching up on rent or utilities, even energy efficiency upgrades in moderate income homes.
Now, how do you guys, people always wonder this, how do you match, you're often going to people who don't have good options in the traditional banking system. The flip side is sometimes they don't have those options because either creditworthiness issues or just they need a lot of help to get things through, which can be expensive. So how do you guys navigate that stuff that traditional banks maybe have shied away from?
Yeah, so the landscape is really interesting. And basically I think of it like this. On the one hand, you have banks and credit unions that are reluctant to serve our population. You know, they're low income, low wealth, poor or no credit, tend not to have bank accounts or use them a lot. On the other hand, you have a $100 billion a year predatory financial services industry. So if you go into most low-income neighborhoods, you'll see payday lenders, pawn shops, rent-owned stores, so on and so forth, that are charging 2, 3, 4, 500% interest. And then there's this space here that we operate in. And what we do, no one else in the country really does. And we found a way to really figure out how to make a loan to someone that a bank doesn't want to lend to and that a predatory lender is all too eager to do so.
Yeah, because there's a lot of room between the rate a regular bank might charge and the 2, 3, 4, 500% that you might get out of a predatory lender.
Exactly. And like I said, the banks really have not found a way to make these loans profitably to our customers. And so they're very underserved and they're overserved by the bad guys. So we're here to try to put them out of business, which is pretty cool thing to try to do.
Yeah. So the reason you're on today is you're launching a debt offering, and you guys have done a lot of unique things over the years, and this is another one of them.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you to explain it. Walk us through what is this? Why are you doing it? How does it work?
Yeah. So this is a first of its kind model. It's something called a direct public offering, or DPO. And we're operating off an exemption that's from the 1933 Securities Act, believe it or not.
FDR era, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so what it does is it allows nonprofits like us to issue debt without having to register with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which saves us hundreds of thousands of dollars in compliance costs. Moreover, it allows us to publicly market the offering and make it available to non-accredited investors so that the average Joe can put a couple $1,000s into the offering. So we're going out and raising $4.25 million from social investors in 15 states, including all of New England, but New Hampshire, for whatever reason. We're paying people up to 5% on that money. And then we're going to use it to create 60 jobs at Capital Good Fund and make 17,000 loans over the next 5 years. By doing that, we'll actually be able to generate enough revenue from our portfolio to cover all of our costs and pay back our investors. And this is really important because one of our basic challenges is we've got a proven business model, right? We've done 1,000 loans, we have a 92% repayment rate, national recognition, great team, all that good stuff. But fundamentally, we lack the resources to make enough loans to really compete with the predatory lenders, many of whom are publicly traded. So this will allow us to invest in personnel, in marketing, and systems so that we can really scale.
So it's kind of one of those do well by doing good pitches you're making. You're not asking people for a charitable contribution, let me ask it a different way. How does that work? Because you are a nonprofit.
Correct.
But people are going to be trying to make, as you said, up to 5% on their investment with you. How does that work?
Yeah, so the way to think of it is charitable giving is stuck at about 3% of GDP. And it's been that way in the last 50 years. So it's a very finite pool of money. Very few nonprofits can really achieve significant scale. By tapping into the capital markets, that's almost a limitless source. Now, one of the questions I ask people is, let's say you have $5, $10, or even $1,000 sitting in a CD, and you want to invest it with your values. Where would you put it? And most people tend not to have an answer. And this is our response. So one of our goals here is to really give people an option that want to invest socially to do so, locally in an organization that they know and care about and believe in.
So as I think $1,000 is your minimum investment, right? And how are you going to decide when you say earn up to 5%? Is that based on the return of the portfolio, I assume, over the length of the debt offering?
It's tiered, so we're trying to incentivize people to give us a longer term. So the minimum is 7 years with annual interest-only payments. So you'd start at 1% with a $1,000 investment at 7 years, and then you would get 3.5% if you gave us 10 years. And the whole idea is that we're a very low-margin, high-volume business. So when you do a $300 loan, you don't make a whole lot of money. So the way for it to become profitable, and again, even though we're a nonprofit, that doesn't mean we can't generate revenue. Mm-hmm. It just means that we can't give those profits to investors.
To you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not generating great profits personally.
Dividends,
We have to reinvest that into the business. Mm-hmm. So the key is that we need to make a lot of these loans in order for that revenue to catch up with expenses. And by allowing us 7 years to do that, then there's less pressure, we can do a little more experimentation, we can even start to lower the rates that we charge our clients over time.
Now, are the interest payments taxable for people?
They are, unfortunately, unless it's done through a donor-advised fund, because that money's already been donated into that
All right,
account.
well, if someone has a donor-advised fund, I bet they have a good lawyer, too, who will explain all the tax advantages. So people who might be interested in at least learning more, maybe some people are already ready to give you some of their money. So how do they go about it? How do they get involved?
Yeah, so what we did was we created a kind of a unique structure. So, for-profit companies create all sorts of structures to allow them to grow and oftentimes pay less taxes. We created a sister nonprofit called Social Capital Fund. And that's actually the entity that's issuing the debt. So people can go to socialcapitalfund.org. They can see our pitch deck and also our 60-page snoozer prospectus. After reading that, they would contact me, and it's pretty simple from there. You tell me the term and the amount you want to invest. I send a simple subscription agreement. You cut a check, and then you start getting annual interest-only payments, and we go and change lives.
So you want to raise, is it up to, or is it definitely $4.25 million?
$4.25 million is the max.
And do you have a timeline for it?
We do. So our goal is to hit $500,000 by January 1st. We've already raised $200,000, including $100,000 from Alan Hassenfeld, who, Hasbro Toys is the Hassenfeld Brothers company, and he's an amazing philanthropist. And then the $4.25 million the goal is by the end of 2016. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hire 5 people in the first quarter of 2016, and then another 5 in the last 3 quarters. And this is really cool in a state that needs jobs. The people that we're hiring are from the community, underemployed. So not only are we going to change 17,000 lives with our loans, but we're also going to create 60 jobs in Rhode Island.
That's really interesting. So briefly, how much risk would people take on you? About 10 seconds on that.
Well, so it's an unsecured loan. We're paying up to 5%. Obviously, you're investing in our ability to grow, but the return is not just the financial return, but the social return on the investment.
All right, that's the pitch from Andy Posner, always doing something interesting in the financial world, the Capital Good Fund, and the website, it was Social Capital Fund, right?
Correct.
Social Capital Fund, if you want to learn more about that. Thank you for joining us this week and every week on Executive Suite. We'll see you back here next week.